Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second part of our terrific conference. I hope you enjoyed the keynote speak by Ritu this morning. My name is Lisa Pook. I'm an Organization Development Director at MRA, and I'm delighted and excited to be your moderator for this morning's session, Inclusive Leadership Behaviors. The slide deck and the DEI session worksheet are posted in the resources section, and I encourage you to fill out that worksheet with your notes and takeaways for the session. As the session goes on, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions directly to Stephen, our presenter, and then use the chat for other communication between participants. We'll answer as many questions as we can get to at the end of the presentation. So today joining us is Stephen Brown, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Talent Acquisition with Molson Coors Beverage Company, where he's responsible for ensuring the execution of the company's DEI strategy across the US, Canada, and Latin America. He works closely with senior leadership team while partnering with the organization to ensure that the right tools, resources, programs, and processes for DEI advancements are aligned with recruitment, leadership, employee development, employee engagement, and retention. His focus includes strengthening leadership accountability for fostering a workplace where all employees feel connected and valued while being their authentic selves. I'm delighted to welcome Stephen, and I encourage you to join me in welcoming Stephen this morning. And Stephen is going to join us in just a sec. I think we got a little bit of technical difficulty here. So I appreciate your patience while we get Stephen connected so that you can hear his presentation. And thanks for the thumbs up. We're going to embrace that technology, kind of clumsiness that sometimes happens. Thanks in the chat. I'm really glad that you know Stephen, and I agree with you. He's a great leader and someone that we can learn a lot from. We had a chance to have some conversations earlier this week, and I really appreciated that. There we go.
Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Stephen. So let me again say, let's welcome Stephen Brown, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Talent Acquisition for Molson Coors Beverage Company. Thanks for being here.
Hey, my apology, Lisa, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for the claps. Might be premature until you actually hear my presentation, but we're going to go from that one. I'm excited to be part of this. As I'm sharing with the team, for us in Molson Coors, we use October as a month of inclusion, and every Wednesday, we actually have a number of programs. So I'm happy that I'm able to join in the session today. The conversation that we're going to have, it's really a lot of work that we're doing within the organization, and I'm excited about that, the work. Just make sure. Not sure why I'm having problems right now. Apologies. So listen, I'm already a little bit late and I apologize. So we're going to have a conversation. I really hope it's more of a conversation, less and less of a presentation. But I want to talk about a couple of things today and then get your thoughts on it. First, I want to kind of really just start with the basics in regards to who owns DEI and why. Really moving away from just words to action. I think there is a huge piece there that I think over the last couple of years, a lot of companies, a lot of leaders have talked about DEI, but what has really been put in place. And then I think there's behaviors that each of us as leaders really need to own. And frankly, when I think about leaders, it's not just about if you have people leadership responsibilities, but are you a leader in regards to how you influence, how you really drive the organization? And then ultimately, we want to just kind of end today in regards to a commitment to action. So probably one of the first things I would do is test your knowledge in regards to who does own DEI. And in my opinion, and I will maybe just think about this one for a while, I think sometimes, particularly at Molson Coors, we really have to think about this, that sometimes you kind of think of, does just the DEI team own DEI? And I say really loudly, no, I think everyone should own it. And so when I think about my team, we have a core team of 3 of us. We call it small but mighty. But ultimately, when I think about this one, we have 9,000 plus employees that really make up Molson Coors, the Americas. And in my humble opinion, I'm looking for all 9,000 of them to become DEI ambassadors. But then ultimately, I think it really is the leaders, and I think there's an emphasis on the leaders, and that's really where we want to talk about today. And so, 2 things can be true: everyone owns it, but ultimately, how is it driven? How is it endorsed? How is it really kind of influenced by leaders themselves? I think it's a key piece here. So, as always, I think you always want to kind of start with a business case. Now, I do this in a very intentional way. I think sometimes when we think about DEI, it can be a little bit of a heart related, so in regards to, in my heart, my compassion, my empathy, DEI is the right thing. But this is an opportunity to really connect, as we kind of talk about, really connecting your head with your heart. And it has to be a business case associated with it. And I really do start with the head. So I think if you connect your head to the heart, it kind of flows down very naturally. If you're trying to do the heart to the head, there's a little bit hesitation, kind of moving upward. And so how do you just kind of make sure that as an organization, you're giving a business case on why DEI, and sometimes I know some organizations also call it DEIB. And I know earlier the conversation around the B, the belonging, was talked about, and we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But if we start with the head, and I will say to you that when I rejoined the company in 2020, we did a culture assessment with Korn Ferry, and we continued that relationship. So some of the slides I'm going to share with you today is really on the work that Korn Ferry shared with Molson Coors, and really it is something that we continue to use for today. And some of you may be familiar with some of this data, and that is back in 2021. And frankly, I would share with you that it probably has even strengthened over the last couple of years. So we recognize, Korn Ferry recognized when they looked at a number of organizations at different maturity levels, that 87% of them feel like they make better decisions based on the diversity and inclusion of teams. A business case, you want to make that happen. 73 of employers really talk about the performance of their employees in regards to when the voices are heard within organizations, the level of engagement continues to go up. And then most companies also looking to how are you actually more innovative. And the opportunity when you have a diverse team, 75% seems to be much more productive and innovative when you have a diverse team. So the business case is there. 30% of the companies that have an executive team that is diverse outperform on productivity. And so sometimes, in some cases, you can probably just kind of stop here and say, this is why you do it. But I think this is really more the business case why you have DEI within your organization, but it's not necessarily the end of it in regards to the inclusive leadership. And that's really the piece that we want to continue to think about. Again, this is really more strengthening the conversation I just had. in regards to the value of having diverse organizations. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment because I recognize that the audience today are at different levels, different um, a placement in regards to the DEI journey. Some of us are just at the beginning of this journey. I absolutely understand and appreciate that. Others have been around for some time, and others are just really advanced. And to me, it doesn't really matter where you are with your journey, as long as you're on the journey. I think that's really important because there's certainly a value associated with how you are there. Sometimes how I explain this is the DEI journey is your North Star. And that journey is you're facing north. that sounds really simple, but sometimes folks want to be looking at their North Star and they're facing different directions. How do you, in a very intentional way, make sure that that you're facing north, and then giving the value associated with why having a diverse teams outperform the organization? I think that's in a very intentional way. So if you go from in regards to the why, in regards to, yes, you ultimately need to have diverse teams and there's a value associated with that one, then how do you, in a very intentional way, move from just the words to action? And the way that I frame this up sometimes as I'm talking to people is your words are, you have good intentions. Your action is you're being intentional. And having good intentions and being intentional is a bridge. And we have to be really, really mindful that good intentions itself do not get you to that going north and then moving along the North Star. And that sounds fundamental, but I have to tell you, I think that there was a while, particularly if you kind of think back in 2020, 2021, there was a lot of words being used in regards to the intentionality that companies, people, humans was going to do around this DEI. And now I ask you, at the end of 2023 into 2024, have you lived up to those commitments? Have you really driven what you said you're going to do? One of my prior employers, I spent 14 years at GE Healthcare. And one of the things we talk about GE a lot is in regards to your say-do ratio. What you say and what you do should always be one or greater. And so when I say that in regards to, are your words matching your action? And if that is not 1-to-1, actually, if it's less than one, then this is when you really need to step out. Now, to be, just to be completely transparent, there's a lot of things out there that can prevent you potentially from having that ratio of 1-to-1. We recognize that, we think about the way that business is being ran, demographics of the organization, the technologies happening, the environmental pieces. All of these pieces can really shape how you can potentially say, well, I have good intentions, I recognize this one, but work is getting in the way, life is getting in the way, the politics is getting in the way, the social dynamics are getting in the way. And I recognize all of that. And as an inclusive leader, as an inclusive organization, you have to say yes and. So I recognize that in regards to the innovation cycle, the competition, the economy itself, the multiple generations that we have here. We have 4 or 5 generations within a workforce. How do you possibly address all of those challenges that each generation want to bring? When you think about the technology, and you saw me earlier that I struggle with technology, when you think about this technology piece here, how does that get in the way? And these are real threats that I understand organizations go through. An inclusive leader will figure out, yes, I have these challenges, and I recognize I need to be really thoughtful how I am part of that intentionality to face due north and hit that North Star. I don't want to make light of any of these things that you see on the screen because they're real. And if you just kind of go with your heart saying, but it's easy. I mean, this is the right thing to do. I get that piece of it. But again, you have to think about, in my head, these are real things. How do I not have that interrupt how we want to deliver this within the organization? So I hope that makes sense to you, because I think it is something that, as HR professionals, as DEI practitioners, sometimes we focus more on the head, and we have to make sure that we are, in addition to the HR leaders and the DEI practitioners, we're also business leaders. and we recognize that these things are true, and we want to make sure that we are in a position to help our organization, our culture, our people drive and live in a organization that they feel valued and able to make things happen. And again, I go to the, part of my role now is not only having the opportunity to be part of the DEI organization, I also have opportunity to lead our talent acquisition organization. And so we know that in regards to diverse talent, where talent lies, that we have, by the 2050, the number of people within the workforce who are 65 plus is going up. We recognize that women only account for one of 5 C-suite positions, and that's even smaller when you think about women of color. We think about the millenniums and the demographic associated with where they fall within the organization. When you think about members who identify within the LGBTQ and where they are, all of these things are true factors that a business leaders need to think into play. Why am I talking about all of this? Because frankly, if you think about this inclusive leader that we're going to talk about in a moment, the behaviors associated with it, these are the things that they are faced with. These are things that you're probably faced with. These are things that I am faced with. And sometimes when you're faced with these things, it's too easy to say, let me be an inclusive leader later. Let me think about what we need to do later. Let me deal with what's in front of me right now. And I'm a huge proponent on this really, really powerful word that I use very often, and wait for it because it may be hard for you to understand. The word is and, A-N-D. But and can be a really hard word. How do you figure out what's happening all around you and think about how you can be in a very intentional way, this inclusive leader, again, that we're going to talk about just in a moment. The other piece I want to think about is, and I know that if you joined the earlier session, this is something that was also talked about, is at Molson Coors, we've been very intentional in regards to how we're going to define diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reality of it is that probably for the first 3 years, again, I rejoined the company in March of 2020, we wanted to make sure that the fundamental piece was just understood, how we're going to define DEI within the organization. And by the way, and I hope that each of you will appreciate this, that the definition of diversity and the definition of equity and the definition of inclusion are different. And sometimes we use them interchangeably. They're different and have different actions. Ultimately, we want to make sure that we do these really, really well. We then can create a culture of belonging. And belonging is a feeling. Do you feel like you belong? Have we created an environment that you can bring your authentic self, your best self to the organization? That's a journey in and of itself. And I think sometimes we don't really kind of embrace how are we making people feel within the organization. And I suggest to you that inclusive leaders play a critical role on this within the organization. And this is really where we are within our journey. I think that we've done some really good work. And by the way, we have some work to do. And a lot of times when you hear me speak in this circle, I also be very intentional that I use the word ing because it's work, it's working, it's a verb. And that kind of allows me to really think in a way that I'm not there. I don't think we are ever there because of all the other things I talked about, that we have to continue to like use this muscle and then use it even more. And that's what an attention leader really thinks about. So I'm setting a stage here because I think it's really important for us to kind of think about where does this sense of belonging happens. And by the way, I mentioned to you earlier that this month of inclusion, October for us, our theme this year is a sense of belonging, as a belonging in action, because this is the journey that we're on. And I need for inclusive leaders to understand that the journey to belonging is making sure you're doing the D, the E, the I in an active way, ongoing. And so when we think about where we are as an organization, and we want to build this high performing culture, there's a number of circles and bubbles that an organization needs to think about. How does you really kind of think about all of these things in a very intentional way ongoing? This is what in my opinion, an inclusive leader really thinks about in a active way, in a very intentional way. And this is the work that we're doing at Molson Coors. I know hopefully some of you know who we are as an employer, but I also recognize I have colleagues out there that either used to work here now, and I suggest that you kind of think about this is work that we're trying to do in a very intentional way at Molson Coors. I'm excited about that, and I recognize we have more to do. So I said all that to say, let's now think about the behaviors of inclusive leaders. And I want to kind of build up to this. I think is really important for us to kind of think about all the things that you should maybe think about even before you start kind of defining this inclusive leader. What could potentially get in the way? How you set the stage associated with this one? And then now, how do you, in a very intentional way, start to work with your workforce associated with being an inclusive leader? And so, again, another test for you. Who builds a sense of belonging? And is this a trick question? Yep, that's kind of what I do. Because I kind of think about it as everyone. It's not just the DEI leader. It's just not the leadership within the organization. It is everyone has a chance to do this. Between the relationships you have with your colleagues, relationship you have with your organization, with your leadership, everyone builds that piece of it with an emphasis on leaders. Ultimately, everyone owns it, and the powerful word I talked about earlier, with emphasis on leaders, and it's huge with that one. And so we talk about this a lot within our organization. I mentioned the conversation that most humans want to have a sense of belonging. We're hardwired within our DNA that we want this piece here. And that we recognize that 40% of people say they feel isolated at work when they don't have a sense of belonging. We recognize that inclusive leaders can play a huge role as it's associated with belonging. Again, this might be something that was also mentioned a little bit earlier, that this belonging in the workplace and inclusion can lead to better job performance, reduction in turnover, and decrease in sick days. I can literally get ill when I know things are not going the way that it needs to go. I recognize that if I work for someone who doesn't value me, who doesn't see me, who doesn't even connect with me, I'm not feeling well. I don't get it. And so that's a huge piece of why this makes sense. Again, remember connecting this head to the heart, and I think it's huge with that piece. Just give me one moment. Sorry about that. And so this inclusive leadership must drive belonging and growth. We recognize that some of the biggest challenge that we have is create growth. And then we have to grow in order to have differentiation. And then we need to move to innovation. And then you need to have the diversity. And then you have this inclusion. And so all of these really matter in regards to inclusive leadership. That from this beginning to the piece here, it's extremely important in regards to what's the role for inclusive leadership. And I suggest to you that they drive belonging, and thus they drive growth for the organization. Shared the screen with you earlier, and I think it's just kind of the connection between why you want to think about this and how it drives your organization, and the managers that really manage in an inclusive way, they can really drive a number of areas. Key leadership sustainability, I think, is also huge, that this behavior of an inclusive leader kind of that really thinks about how you drive change, how you drive culture, how you think about in a transparent or equitable way, how you think about the practices. And when Lisa shared with you the things I'm responsible for here, I really think about in regards to an inclusive leader How are we thinking about processes? How are we thinking about practices? How do you think about this growth mindset, the skill set that you have here? And then ultimately, if you do all those things well, how do you then role model this and hold each other accountable for delivering it? Again, if I go from good intentions to being intentional, ultimately that bridge is also accountability. An inclusive leader needs to hold his, her, their self really accountable for how am I driving this in a very intentional way. So for us at Molson Coors, here's how we define, in many ways, what we see around being an inclusive leader. And to me, and I'm using this very specifically, in me, this inclusive leader is our effective leaders. Now, you may disagree with that piece of it, but I strongly believe that if you're not being inclusive as a leader, then I'm not sure how effective you are, because I just hold those things to be true in the way that I approach this. Inclusive leaders are self-aware. This is huge for me. I think there's some things that, particularly as I think about how I was raised in the business area, is that I'm like, this is the way you do it. This is the way I grew up to do it, and you have to do it this way. I'm like, is how I used to do it really the way that it needs to be done now? If I think about all the things that are made up in the organization that perhaps wasn't made 25 years ago, and they also are authentic, that they don't pretend to be, they are. And that's a huge piece. That's a journey that you have to go with it. I believe that they bring grit, that they have a will do, we're going to make this happen. And they're just not leading during the good times, but the really challenging times. All the threats I talked about, they're right in front with that one. They're situational. It's not one way to lead. It's not one way to say, I'm going to always do it this way. It's like, let me just make sure that I am flexing the way that I'm leading based on the circumstances that's out there. They have a growth mindset. They really think about, how do I move, strive, think differently every day? One of our values here at Molson Coors, we have 5. One of our values at Molson Coors is learn every day. When I first came back here, I'm like, why is that a growth value? Like, why is that something that we want to use as a value here? That goes around continuous improvement. There's an opportunity to just say, we're good enough. I know everything. I have 25 years of work experience. Come to me, I got all the answers. And the answer there is, you had all the answers, but how do you make sure they continue to really challenge yourself in a very intentional way? They're great coaches. They encourage, they support, they really take pride in developing others in their teams, because they recognize if they really are not focused on them, but they focus on others, the opportunities to get better performance, better productivity, better humans who want to come to work and can do this, can do this in a very empathetic, powerful way. That's huge. That these individuals who are part of the teams will be the next leaders within the organization, and ultimately they're great listeners. They're empathetic. We do a lot of work here that we call our empathy experience. And saying, how is it important to make sure that you are doing things not for you but for others, that you're leading through their frame of reference, that you are inspiring, that you're motivating, that you find opportunities to recognize people for doing the right thing in their performance and accomplishments, and help people when they need to do better in a very intentional way. And so, having said all of that, is about a call to action. And I want to be mindful of the time we have here. But all of this is important that you have to think about. So if I'm doing these things right, how am I then committed to the action? So if I think about this and I love this quote from a philosopher. His name is Spider-Man. It says, "No, with great power comes great responsibility." And that's a huge piece here. Like when I first heard Spider-Man rock this statement, I'm like, that's pretty powerful with that one. And so I still think it's really responsible. An inclusive leader kind of thinks about, with great power comes great responsibility. And so there's a good and there's an inclusive leader. And I share with you that there's some good leadership, which we all need, but then how do you make that bridge in a very intentional way to be an inclusive leader? And if you take these side by side, one of the examples here in a good leadership is I look for the best talent. I don't see color or gender when hiring. Next level, inclusive leader thinks about I look for the best talent and the diversity we need to get us to the next level. I have to tell you, even when I think about I don't see color, that sounds, and I'm a DEI practitioner, right? And I'm like, when I first heard that, I'm like, that's pretty powerful. I just want to be, seeing for Stephen Brown. The reality of it is Stephen Brown, and I don't want to surprise anybody here, is a Black guy. And I need for you to see who I am, the complete me, the authentic me, the whole me. And so the inclusive leader is thinking about that one. Another example here, I'm the one who get my time on those and ask for help and eager to grow. I get to know my team needs and personal context and meet them where they are. Again, that's situational leadership. It's not necessarily once they get here, I will manage this. Is how do I go there and really think about how they and bring them to their best performance. And so I really challenge you in regards to these behaviors around inclusive leadership. Use this side by side and think about, are you a good leader or an inclusive leader? And then you take this to your organization and you have this conversation with those leaders. Are we doing the good things? And are we doing things that are very inclusive in the way that we think about it? I think is really important for us to think about that. So, commitment to action. Now, again, I want to be mindful of the time here, but I will ask if we can maybe spend I don't know, 60 seconds or so. Think about this for a moment. Reflect on the things I talked about today and think about in the chat, what will you start? Maybe one thing that I will do differently, one thing I will share, one thing I will stop, and one thing I will perhaps continue to do if, as a human, I want to be in a very intentional way of how I will approach this as an inclusive leader. And I appreciate your vulnerability. If you wouldn't just maybe drop it into the chat, think about that. Just take one of them, what you might start, what you might do differently, what you will share, because I say this often, even if I'm not the best presenter, speaker you have today, there's something out of the last 30 minutes that I believe you can take with you. And that in a very intentional way, if you commit to doing something out loud, you type it, you write it down, the opportunity for you actually do that after we leave today increases. And so there's just one thing you can take with you. I'm encouraging you to do so. So again, I'm gonna pause for a moment because if you haven't figured out, I'm a talker. Just love for you to kind of think about what you might do after today's session. Love the comments that are coming through. And Lisa's telling me I need to hurry up. So I want you to keep putting those in there. And just before we wrap up, I would love to show you a quick video and then we can go with the next conversation.
It doesn't matter who you are or where you work. We're not dealing with business as usual anymore, and we won't be again.
Economic turbulence and fractured markets, the extreme business of business. Our world is hyper-connected, and disruption is constant.
Diversity of customers, diversity of ideas, diversity of talent.
As has been said before, it's volatile, ambiguous, complex. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and uncertain about how to thrive or even survive, uncertain about how to lead.
The old hero model of leadership is old. Standing alone, pointing the way forward, carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. That model was built for a different time.
Change is in the wind. Talking with the best of the best, we can see that a new way of leading is emerging. leading from the center, not from the top. Deliberately leading through diversity, not in spite of it.
Inclusive leaders see diversity as their greatest opportunity, not their biggest threat. In this brave new world, inclusive leaders tap into the wisdom of the crowd, the diverse crowd. We do leadership differently with 6 signature traits.
Commitment,
Courage,
Cognizance of bias,
cultural intelligence,
Curiosity.
Collaboration. Inclusive leadership. It starts with you.
So I didn't create that video, but when I saw it, I thought, this is right. This is the thing. These are things that we talk about in a very intentional way. And I just thought it would be a great add to not only today's presentation, but one that you can say, let me take this away. Let me really think about this one. I'm just really encouraging all of us, and I say us in a very intentional way, all of us to really think about inclusive leadership in maybe a way that we didn't always think about it. The intentionality is huge. It sometimes feels easy, and I will say the journey is worth it. It has been a lot of work we've done at Molson Coors. I don't take responsibility for most of it because ultimately it is each of us being very intentional in regards to wanting to be on this journey. And we talk about it a lot. The partnership that we have with our people development team, the partnership we have within human resources, the challenge that we give to our leadership team, that it is key important. We recognize that this thing called inclusive leadership can drive retention, it drives recruitment, and drive engagement. And so I really encourage, if you're not on this journey, consider going North Star in regards to your path to be an inclusive leader. So Lisa, I'm gonna pause. I don't know if there's any questions out there. I think we have some time here. Just see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a great presentation. I really took a lot away from it myself, and I know from the comments that our participants have as well. I'm really struck by the slide that you had where you had given the difference or the explanation of effective leaders. And I love that it's really a list of competencies, right? And I think all of us can go back to that list of competencies or look at it as a framework to look at building development opportunities for our own leaders internally. And so my question around that is, in your work developing inclusive leaders and helping leaders develop inclusive behaviors in your organization, what are some of the keys that you've learned along the way? What's been stuff that you found has helped that development of inclusive behaviors? And then I guess my follow-up question to that is going to be, what are some of those roadblocks and how did you get around them?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Lisa. It is, I will say this is where our leadership development, our people development team has done a great job there, that we don't assume this is innate for everybody, that you're just going to kind of wake up or born with saying, I'm going to be an inclusive leader, right? So many of us, and I get it, we base our leadership on our lived experiences. We base our experience on things that we have seen around us. And we have, in some cases, had to interrupt that and say, and give a clear definition of, and to your point, in regards to what the slides show, here's what it looks like. Because I think sometimes we just assume people know it. So we spend a lot of time defining, here's what it looked like, and here's then how you can apply it when you go out of this space. It is sometimes that when you're in the space, you in a learning space or wherever it might be, you're just like, yeah, I get that. That's easy. And after the session, I just kind of take it with us. And so we don't just say it once, we say it twice, we continue to say it, we use the language. We did this demonstration with that one. And then we continue to, in a very intentional way, connect the dots. So this is what it looks like here. This is what it looks like, and you bring it together and use that common language. Barriers, I kind of talked about those too. it is sometimes too easy that when life happens, you abandon this. This is because, by the way, this is work, right? And it is being intentional about how you keep it there. And you say, even through the tough times, we're going to demand, require, expect inclusive leadership to happen. And this is also one last point with this one. It isn't the current news cycle and you just turn the page. This is how you embed this within your organization in a very intentional way. If I have not used the word intentional yet, I'm going to keep using it, right? It is because it takes work to get there. And so the barriers have been that when we have faced tough times, you say in an inclusive way, that's how we're going to get there. So it's just kind of balancing. There's a definition, there's a way to do it, and you don't abandon it, and it happens at all levels of the organization.
So one of the challenges I think that that certainly I've felt in working with organizations, and I think many others do, it's that challenge of getting the conversation going without having the judgment part of it. As you know, as soon as I come to leaders in my organization and say, we need to work on being inclusive leaders, we get some of those walls up, right? Well, what, you're calling me non-inclusive? I'm not. Or your example about, I just want to hire the best people, I don't look at color. What are some of the ways that we can reframe that
Yeah.
says, this is important, I'm
I
not
love that.
judging you, but I'm inviting you to.
Such a good question. We talk about this a lot here. If I come to you, Lisa, and say, Lisa, I'm going to change you. I'm going to change you into an inclusive leader. You're like, well, first of all, I don't need to be changed. You change yourself, right? So the conversation is, we're going to expand you. And there's a difference between hearing the word change and hearing the word expand, right? And so we're going to expand you in regards to what does inclusive leader look like? And we're going to adopt that. Because then when you use the word expand, you get to choose how quickly you're going to accept it or not. But you're not resistant when you hear the word change right away, right? And so we say, what if I just said that the world is this way? And what if we just kind of open it up? And what does this look like? And how do you adopt this piece there? So we've been very intentional in regards to, I'm not telling you that you are wrong in the change. I'm telling you where we're going this organization, and we have a journey. And you get to choose how, but you don't choose what. The what is inclusive leadership. How you're going to get there. When you get there, we're going to help you. And by the way, you story tell. I need to work on this too. This is just because I'm in HR, just because I'm a DEI practitioner, doesn't mean I don't need this piece of it. And when I put myself part of the story, not you need to change, well, we need to expand, it feels like it's received in a different way.
So your word expand is resonating with lots of people in the chat. That gives it a much more, and look at the hearts you're getting on that too. That expansion is something that I think people can buy into. It's a great way of reframing it.
Good.
So before we wrap up from our session and move on to our next sessions, I'm wondering if I were to ask you kind of the one thing that you would want all of us to know about bringing in that expansion to inclusive leadership, what's that one thing that's always kind of driving you or helping you keep moving forward?
Wow, I would probably say to you, the journey is worth it. Like I just know, and I think maybe because my own journey, I recognize that the journey is worth it, and that there are times that you're going to probably feel more uncomfortable before you become comfortable. And we have to, as leaders, as people, of humans, I think we have to be okay with being uncomfortable, knowing this is a journey with that one. So I think that's probably the piece there that I have said to many over the last couple of years. Some of this work has been really heavy. Some of this work has been to a point of saying, both as a professional and as a person, human, this is heavy. The emotional tax side of this is heavy. And then, Lisa, I think what is important to me is, how do I make this less heavy for the next generation? Like, how do I make this, is there some type of legacy that I can say that I had some influence in making this less heavy for others? And if I recognize this isn't about me, which if anyone knows me, sometimes it's a lot about me. But if I just say this is not about me, but it's about the next person, it makes that journey a little bit easier, even during the heavy times.
Mhm. That's such a great inspiration to leave us with, that it's heavy work, it's important work, and it's worth it.
Yeah,
Work
it
that's
really
worth
is.
it.
It really
So
is.
thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I'm taking away using and expand and intentional, and from the comments.
Intentionality is huge.
Personality is key, absolutely.
Yeah,
So, and those things are resonating with people. We can see
right.
in the chat as well. So thank
Right.
you so very much. We loved having you here, and I really appreciate your participation.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate it.
with
And
us.
everyone, if I can ever help on your journey, you let me know, because it takes a village.
Wonderful.
Comes right.
So at this time, we're heading into a break until 10:25. That's Central Time. If you're not in Central Time, you figure out what that is. You can close out of this window and then select your next session from the sessions page. Enjoy your break and enjoy the rest of our conference. Thank you, everyone.